Every team, no matter what they do, has to deal with communication breakdowns and conflict. It just comes at the territory. But how often do we see a really structured, thought-out plan for handling it? So today we're going to dive into one organization's super detailed, biblically based approach to, well, weaving a stronger team fabric.
Okay, so the whole framework really kicks off with this powerful metaphor. Picture a team at its absolute best, where each part is distinct, but they all move in perfect harmony with each other. It creates something that's just balanced and beautiful. That's the ideal state, right? Where every person, every process just works. But just like that mobile, a team is delicate. It's a fragile balance. And honestly, it doesn't take much to throw the whole system off. A small misunderstanding, a moment of frustration, and suddenly, those strings that connect everyone, they get knotted up, tangled, and it can cripple the team's effectiveness and really damage its reputation. All right, so before you can even think about untangling a knot, you have to know what kind of knot you're dealing with. This first section is all about diagnosing the problem with real precision. And this framework gets super specific. It doesn't just talk about bad habits or poor communication. Nope. It actually draws from the book of Proverbs and gives these destructive forces really sharp names. First, there's the perverse tongue, which is all about gossip and slander that intentionally create chaos. Then, unbridled anger. That's conflict that goes beyond frustration and actually severs relationships. And finally, pride, which they identify as the deep root that stops any real healing from ever happening. And this is a super important distinction they make. The framework basically asks, are you talking about a problem to find a solution, or are you just talking about the problem? See the difference? Healthy processing is all about finding wisdom to restore relationships. Gossip, on the other hand, just fixates on the problem, creates division, and tears people down. It's a powerful question any team can ask itself. Okay, so we've seen what the tangles look like. Now for the big question. How do you actually undo the knots? This next section lays out a really clear, structured pathway for resolving those interpersonal conflicts.
And the entire reconciliation process? It's built on this one single principle from the Gospel of Matthew. The key phrase here, the one that changes everything, is, "You have gained your brother." The goal is never to win an argument, or prove you're right, or punish someone. It is always, always about restoration and bringing that relationship back into harmony.
So this is the core tool for untangling those knots between people. It's a clear, escalating process. Step 1 is always direct and private. Go to the person, just you and them, and handle it with humility. If that doesn't work, then you move to step 2. Bring 1 or 2 objective witnesses, not to take sides, but to help mediate and establish the facts. And only if that fails do you move to step 3, which is involving leadership for a final attempt at a mediated resolution.
Now, that Matthew 18 process is great when you know there's a clear conflict to resolve. But what about those murky situations? The gray areas where you're not even sure what the right thing to say or do is. This is where the framework makes a brilliant pivot, from fixing problems between people to preparing an individual to act wisely before they even open their mouth. And that brings us to the second major toolkit in this whole framework, an internal guide for making those tough individual decisions. They call it the personal playbook. At the heart of this playbook is a concept they call ethical discernment. And it's not about reacting to a crisis in the heat of the moment. It's a proactive process. It's a clear pathway for thinking through a complicated situation before you act to make sure your response is thoughtful, wise, and true to your core principles. So here's the playbook broken down into 5 simple steps. First, get the facts. Separate what you actually know from what you're just assuming. Second, check your heart. This is about self-awareness. Are you driven by ego, fear, or a genuine desire for peace? Third, brainstorm your options and seek wise counsel, with the crucial rule of not letting that counsel turn into gossip. Fourth, choose a response that lines up with your core values. And finally, step 5, reflect and learn. After you act, look back and evaluate what happened. This creates this awesome cycle of getting better and better at handling these things.
So let's see how all this builds. Because these tools for conflict and discernment, they're not just for fixing problems. The real, ultimate goal here is to build a culture where fewer of these tangles happen in the first place.
And this is a huge shift in perspective. A healthy team culture doesn't just happen by accident, and it's not just the result of having a good conflict policy. It's actually built and maintained through the small, intentional, consistent habits of every single person on the team, every single day.
The choice becomes incredibly clear.
In every single interaction, we can either put off destructive patterns, things like lying, holding on to anger, or tearing people down, or we can consciously choose to put on constructive ones, things like speaking the truth with love, forgiving quickly, and using our words to build others up. It's a daily decision that shapes the entire environment. But here's the thing, and this is so important. You can't just expect individuals to do all this on their own. The organization itself has to support them. A healthy culture needs intentional structures in place. Things like known, safe channels for feedback, regular check-ins designed specifically to clear the air, a written shared commitment to these principles, and maybe most critical of all, leadership that consistently models it for everyone.
And all of this brings us back to that ultimate vision. It's not just about being more productive or more efficient. The goal is to create a team that functions as a living, breathing picture of its own values. A team that communicates with grace, navigates conflict with humility, and moves in a kind of unity that is both beautiful and harmonious. And that leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. In a world that is so often divided and full of conflict, what if the way a team works together on the inside, the health of its internal culture, was actually its most powerful and most important message to the outside world? Something to think about.